Alright, what is going on, guys? It is your boy Danny. We are here today with a Maxpeeding rod coilover review on the SC300. We are also going to talk about the Swift springs that I put on them, but we'll do that at the end of the video. So I got my phone here. Basically, this is going to keep me on task as to what we're talking about. I might do this in sections, so we might have a couple cuts here and there, but let's just get straight into this. This is the Maxpeeding rod SC300 review. Today we're going to get into performance, drivability, durability, rebuildability, it's not a word but we're going to use it, the springs, aftermarket springs, and the design. So the springs will be in that order. Everything will be in that order except the aftermarket springs. Aftermarket springs will be the last thing that I go over, and basically what I'm going to do with the aftermarket springs is do everything that I just did with the coilovers, but specifically for the aftermarket springs, which are Swift springs. So without further ado, let's start with the performance side of these SC300 Maxpeeding rod coilovers. So all around, I want to start with giving you guys an idea of the purpose of these coilovers, because a lot of people mistake certain coilovers that are cheaper for performance coilovers. These are not by any means performance coilovers, although they will perform better than stock. Not because they are a better coilover, because that's all subject to opinion based on what you're doing with the car and the purpose, but just it being a shorter coilover and lowering the center of gravity is going to make the car handle better. Now, with that being said, the stroke could be different, the compression could be different. I'm not going to get into all that because I'm not that smart. If you guys want to see something like that, you're going to have to look at Chelsea DeNofa stuff and do your own deductions based on that. Chelsea DeNofa got a lot of good information. Y'all should check them out if you're looking at coilover stuff. Anyways, back to these. So, performance-wise, yes, they're actually a decent performing coilover. Granted, they are not made to perform. So you got monotube and you got twin tube. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe monotube is better than twin tube in terms of performance because it's a more accurate predictability and understanding of the ride, like the way that it goes from human to car connection. So you're gonna get more response from the monotubes, but they're gonna be a rougher ride, which means that it's gonna be much more predictable. It's going to drive better, technically speaking. There's a bunch of other types of things that could go into that factors, but monotube is going to be a more performance-based coilover 9 times out of 10 versus twin tube is more like OEM, and it's designed to be a better daily drivable ride. So these are twin tube. These are not monotube. Monotubes are something like a BC. Some of these do come monotube, I believe, but basically, I believe monotube takes a little more development, a little more money to do. So these being a affordability, like price point coilover, they're not going to be able to do that. All right, I'm going to get into that a little more, and then we'll jump into drivability because we're kind of blending the lines here. So let me just look into that. Now that we kind of know what these aren't for, let's talk about what these are for. So a lot of the point of the Maxpeeding rod coilover is affordability. You get some performance out of it, as well as you make the car look better. So if you go to Maxpeeding rod's website, it's going to say it goes 2 to 3 inches lower, which is what it does. With that being said, the stock spring itself is not the best performing part, which is what we were just talking about, performance. It's not the best performing. Now, the soft spring is decent, and it's good for a lighter car, maybe a lighter SC if you were going on a diet and you were cutting these things up and trying to get them to drive fast. But as far as for stock, it's too soft. It's a really bumpy ride. It's you're feeling all the bumps. It's allowing the shock to bottom out, which is not good for the shock, and it's not good for your chassis. It's not good for your suspension parts and things like that. So as far as the performance for the springs on it, it's not the greatest, which we'll get into later. Let's get into drivability. So drivability-wise, out of the box, when you put them in, they're decent, and the height that they're already set at, I'm not sure if they're even set at a height. You just kind of have to eyeball it and understand it yourself. Now, the way that they're designed, you can get really low out of these, but when you go really low, they're not really performing right the whole point of these coilovers is they're as advertised. So 2 to 3 inches, if you go 2 to 3 inches lower than the stock one, that's what's going to make this coilover perform the best. Obviously, that's probably not what you're looking for. You're just looking to get the car low, which if you're just trying to get the car low, this will definitely do that. These things will allow your cars to get dumped on the ground, on the stock springs, and your car will be low. But drivability wise, if you're going that low, now this doesn't matter what coilover you get. If you're just going that low, your car is going to be not very drivable. You're going to have to turn super far to one side or the other to get over bumps. You're going to be running bumps over. You're going to be hitting the chassis. You're going to be denting in your chassis. So as far as drivability with these bottomed out, it's no good. Now you can do it and it works, but I mean that's typically how any coilover is, you bottom it out. But I would not recommend. If you're going to do that, then you're going to have to go with really stiff springs. I'm not really a stance boy, so I don't know too much, but a lot of the stance boys tend to go with really high rate springs, and the reason for that being is because it makes it stiffer so that the car doesn't bounce as much on the shock, which means that it's not going to bottom out as much and you're not going to crunch your fender on your wheel. Now, your car is still going to bottom out, you're still going to slam on your chassis on the ground, it's just physics. But yes, as far as drivability with them being low out, no fun. Normal drivability, if they're around like a low height, like lower than what they're supposed to be, but they're not that low, it still bottoms out a decent amount. These shocks are really soft. The springs are really soft, so you tend to throw that wheel into the fender. Now, if you look at my old videos, you'll see that I have 1911s on the car when I first got on the road, and my fitment was pretty flush and it was bottoming out. I was riding on rim essentially, like a lot of times when I was, throwing the throttle down and actually getting grip. And because the springs were soft, it did get a lot of grip. But once the chassis started touching the wheels because the springs just couldn't take it anymore, that's when you kind of feel like the rear end get loose and it wouldn't do what you wanted it to do. So yeah, when you get a little bit type of low, it's okay. It's drivable. Would I recommend it for performance use? No. Is it drivable for daily use? Yeah, it's pretty drivable. I daily this car every day. I've been dailying it since that setup. Sorry, we got sounds outside. It's a lot more drivable now because, as you can see, I have it a lot more high up than I did when I had 1911s on there. These are 1810.5s. I had 255s before. These are 235s. So these are a lot thinner tire compared to the other one. And yeah, so it's completely different in terms of heights and things like that. And it's a lot more drivable as you get higher up on the coilover, which we all want our cars to look cool. We all looking for fitment. So unfortunately, if that's what you're looking for, stock, I'm putting an asterisk because we need to know that I'm putting springs on these now and I'm dailing them and it's great, but we'll get to that. But stock, I wouldn't get them and drive them as they are. If you're looking to just spend $300 and leave it at that, these probably aren't the coilovers for you if you're looking for drivability. If you don't care, they'll do the job. Now, again, as you get higher up, once you get pretty high and it's not really ideal, but it looks like normal sports car today look, it's pretty drivable. It's really soft. If you're going to be taking curves and things like that, it's going to compress and you're going to bottom out still. But for the most part, it's drivable. So overall, I would say that these coilovers are pretty drivable if you're driving a shit box. But if you're driving a nice car, I probably wouldn't put these on my nice car if I was looking to make sure that it wasn't going to bottom out and things like that. And I wanted it to stay pretty. But the springs will aid that, and we'll talk about that later. With that being said, we are going to get into the next topic again on my phone, just making sure that I stay on topic. Durability. So let's get into durability. Now, durability, when I say that, we're going to touch base with rebuildability because, durability and that kind of go hand in hand. And that's the next topic after this anyways. So I'm just going to go into durability and then we'll blend into rebuildability. I'm not really going to tell you that we're going into rebuildability. So durability wise, I beat the heck out of these things, man. When I tell you that I drive the wheels off this car, man, like literally. Like, you should have seen my last car. If you haven't, y'all should look up the other video. SC300 build in 10 minutes. I drove the wheels off of it, but I didn't have the coilovers then. But anyways, point being is that I drive the wheels off this car. And the coilovers are fairly good at taking abuse. Now, this is where we're talking about the spring rate again, and we're about to get into the springs after rebuildability, but we're going to touch base with the springs again. And the front, I really didn't have any issues. It does bottom out when I'm hitting curves and things like that. It bottoms out, and the reason that's relevant is because that's really compressing the coilover, which is compressing the shock, which is going to make it overwork, and it's going to abuse the shock. With that being said, if you have the coilover extended like where it's supposed to be, it performs really well, and it's actually very durable, and it takes a lot of abuse. I have not blown any of the front shock absorbers or the coilover. The front coilovers I have no issues with as far as durability. They take a lot of abuse. I'm talking, I've done bumps at 100, I've done bumps at 30, I've done potholes at 50, 60, 80, no issues. I've done them slow, everything. No issues on the fronts. Now the back, back's a different story. If you're going low, if you're bottoming out, if you're doing like I told you about the 1911s like that, you're gonna want a spring back there, and we'll get into that after. Like I said, we're gonna get into that, which is bringing us to rebuildability. But the rears, the way that the car comes down and the way that it squats and things like that, and when you're completely already lowered and then it bashes on the shock, tends to make the shock pop. Now, luckily for me, I had 2 sets of these. I got a set when I bought the car, but they were no good, but some of the parts were good, which is again talking about rebuildability. And then I got a second pair because I was like, you know what, let's try it. I want to know how these things did. So the new ones were the ones that went on there, but because the car was so low and the car was bottoming out, it blew the shock. And the shock on the last one was blown, which the car was also low on that setup too, which is obviously the common denominator here is that the shock was doing all the work, and when the shock is bottomed out, it can't do any work and it can't leverage properly. So as far as durability for the rear, the way stock it is, if you're gonna lower it, it's not durable. I don't recommend if you're gonna sit here and lower it and abuse the car, don't do it if you're not gonna get springs. And again, we're touching base in the future here, but we'll get into that. So durability overall, I would say a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. For the fronts, I would say 8 out of 10, because I abuse them. I haven't had any issues, but I'm just saying 8 out of 10 just because to leave room for error, because you know I do abuse them. So the rears, definitely they're like a 6 out of 10. They could use some love, but here's the catch about them. So I got these coilovers, right, and I got a set with the car that were not the greatest. They were a little crusty, and this is part of what the durability part I'm talking about. Most coilovers get crusty if you don't anti-seize them. This guy didn't properly take care of them. This is part of the stuff that I'm talking about that you should know, that a lot of people give Maxpeeding a bad rap because they don't take care of the coilover properly. I took those old ones, right, because I blew a shock on the new one, and I replaced it with one of the old ones. Completely rebuildable. I took the rings off, the rings on the old one went onto the new one if I wanted to, and vice versa. I might have a mismatch in there, I can't remember, but I knew that the spring in the rear was too soft, which now I'm going to get into the springs, and I'm going to blend this into the rebuildability as well. So I didn't replace that shock in the rear until I knew that I had the springs here, and then I was going to replace the springs in the rear with the new ones. Now, so that leads me into rebuilding it. Completely came apart, completely had no issues coming apart other than it just being crusty and you had to undo them. But the ones that I had that were new, I anti-seized them. Completely come apart, easily adjustable, super easy to use, super easy to rebuild, and super simple. Once I put on the Swift springs, which were 10K in the rear, they come 7K stock. The durability has been 8 out of 10 also. I would say 10 out of 10 because I haven't had any issues. I haven't had any blown shocks. And again, I've been abusing this car. Right now I'm running 14K in the front, which are the Swift springs, and these aren't even Swift springs yet. These are 10K in the back. So I use the stock 10Ks from the front to the back because I had gotten 14K for the fronts, which is a way you guys can save money if you're trying to buy Maxpeeding rods, but you're not trying to go crazy over the budget. You spend $200, buy $300 coilovers, you spend $5 altogether, and you got coilovers, you get 14K for the front, toss the 10K springs in the back, and then you got 10K springs in the back for free. So they're very, very rebuildable. like you can swap the parts from the front to the back very easily, other than the mounts, because you know they have different style mounts from the front to the rear. But everything will go on to everything universally. I would even guess that if you got BMW Maxpeeding rods, you could probably rebuild that shock with these things as long as they're the same style suspension. So I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not going to say that you can. I'm just saying that it's very, very likely. Which leads me into Swift springs. So I haven't put the Swift springs in the rear yet, and the reason for that being is I haven't had to, because I put the 10Ks in the rear. So stock they come with 10K in the front, 7K in the back. Let me just make sure I'm on track here. I'm going to check my phone real quick. Yeah, so before I get into the Swift springs, let's talk about the regular springs. So it's 10K in the front, 7K in the back. And the 10Ks are good and they're decent for the front, but we're talking about SC. It's got a 2J in it. It's about, I think it's like a 400-pound motor, so it's a really heavy motor in the front. So when you're taking corners and things like that, those 10Ks just really get compressed and you tend to bottom out. And when you bottom out, you're losing control of the car. The car's not on the wheels completely, and you'll feel it while you're in the steering wheel and all the other things while you're driving and the inputs. So the stock springs are just not made to be driven on. Like honestly, I wouldn't even, like, personally, if I plan on getting another set of these if I get another SC or if I blow these ones, and I would just replace the springs immediately, because the stock springs are not the greatest. So the 10K and the 7K, the 7K is really soft. When you first get them on the road, it's actually like really bouncy, and like they perform actually decently, and the car is kind of like loose in the rear. And what I mean by that is like the wheels want to spin and you don't get a lot of traction, and they take about, I want to say, a month, possibly even 3 months to settle. Now this is also because I was bottoming out on the wheel, so take into account that the spring was not getting the full load all the time once they started to settle a little more. So it took me about 3 months to really get them to settle in, and then that's when you got the true feeling of the springs and the full coilover. That's when I had the issue with the shock blowing out in the back, and then also the fronts were always fine, but I was always bottoming out when I was taking hard corners and things like that, and it would scrape the front, and I don't get to take the corner as quickly as I would like to. So springs, I would give a 3 out of 10. They work. Would I use them again? Nah, probably not. Now, moving into design, and then we'll get back to the Swift springs and we'll go over really quickly performance and all that other stuff again. Design overall, it's a decent coilover. I wish that they educated a little more. This is what I'm trying to do now, so you know, I'm kind of trying to fill in that gap. But basically, the coilover at its proper height, it performs really well, and it's a really good design as far as it being in the proper specs for the car's geometry. Beyond that, it's a decent coilover that you get you low, and it'll perform okay and definitely better than stock. But springs are just not there, and the weird part about that is that the way that they make these springs is they're 70.5, which is a weird diameter. Nobody really makes springs for that size, which also puts an asterisk on this. 70 mil fits. If you go to swiftsprings.com and you get 70 mil diameter springs, they'll fit on this versus the 70.5, just so you guys know. You guys can do that yourself. Also, the stock springs are 8 inches. That's fine. That works. If you want to go lower, I went to 7 inches and it's working just fine for me. Technically not the proper thing to do, but it seems to be performing better for my setup, and that's what I like. But stock is 8 inches and then a 70.5 diameter for the spring. And the other catch, this is the bad part about the design, on the rears, I showed it, I lost the clips, my phone ended up breaking, and I lost all the stuff on my phone. Apologize. But if the rear coilover, I'm trying to see if I have any on hand here. Hold on 1 second. So if you look, we got this rear coilover, it's got this hole right here, right? So if you're putting these in, this hole is not big enough for the stock bolt back there. So when you get these, I can't remember what the size is, but if you look at my old videos and you go to the coilover install, I think I show it, but you got to drill these out, and basically this hole is too small for the stock bolt. Now, you can get a smaller bolt and put it in here, and that's what a lot of people do. I do not recommend this. Do what you want, but I recommend cutting a hole through this and putting the stock bolt in there. There's a reason that it's that size, so that's why I did that. And that's my only fuss with the design. But other than that, the design's pretty decent. This is the old one that I was talking about that's no good, but it's here still. I kept it for the purpose of the video, actually. Now that we talked about design, let's get into the springs. And let's talk about the springs and talk about why I got the springs, which we already did a little bit, but I'm just gonna brush over it lightly and then show you guys. And tell you guys. So now, Swift springs, we talked about that. I got 7 inches tall, 70 millimeter diameter. If you go to swiftsprings.com or silversnorthamerica.com, they have a bunch of springs on there. You put in 70 mil in their filters for size, and it'll come up with a bunch of springs and their heights. So basically you'll choose, if it goes and it filters a 70 mil out, 70 millimeter, it'll say 8 inch, 7 inch, 6 inch, 9 inch, whatever height the spring is, and you order it based on that. Now, if you want to go back with the stock setup from the Maxpeeding rod coilovers and do the proper setup, it'd be 8 inches. But if you're going to go with something like me, where you want the car to be a little lower, but you still want it to perform, go with 7. It should work. Now, if you go back to my old videos, I show you how I rebuilt it and everything. That's all in there. But catch is, technically 7 inches. If it's not made like that, it may not be the proper design for this. And that goes into Chelsea DeNolfa stuff, where it's may compress too much for the shock absorber and a whole bunch of other things, but I'm not going to get into all that. All I'm telling you is that I daily drive the 7 inch and I have no issues with it. I still got 8 inches in the back because it's a stock spring from them, but I have Swift springs that are coming. They're here, that are going to go in there, and this is them right here. So this is a 10K. I went with 10K because I have 10K in there already and it's performing just fine. I just want it to be a Swift spring, and I'll get into why that is as well. So these springs perform much better than the stock springs. Now, part of that performance is, and this kind of blends, and I'm going to talk about those, but they're not really going to make too much sense as far as like opinion. There's not too much range here. So drivability wise, that goes down to spring rate. Now that's what I'm talking about. There's not really anything opinion wise here. Spring rate is going to be part of your drivability, and the reason I say that is because your spring rate, depending how stiff it is going to decide how stiff your ride is, and how your car's suspension and geometry and all that is going to translate that to how stiff the ride is and how it feels to you and your steering and your car moving around and hitting bumps and all that stuff. That also has to do with the shock, but we're not getting into shocks because you could get a digressive shock and things like that, and that'll change the way that the car takes a bump and things like that. But as far as the spring goes, drivability wise, I went with 10K. You could go with a higher spring rate and it'll work just fine. It's just going to be a stiffer ride, and basically the reason for that being is going to be like a stance build where you don't want to crunch your fenders and things like that. But I wanted something that has a little form and a little function. So this is my balance. I got a 10K and then a 14K in the front. So that has to do with drivability. Performance wise, again, it's opinionated. If you got to do your, if you want to know, you got to do your research. You got to look on the forums, see what build you're trying to do, and go based off of that. The forums will tell you, because in Japan, I know they run like really high spring rates for these cars. Sometimes they'll run like 82K. Yes, 82K. And the car will be slammed. So that's why they're doing that, because they don't want the car to move. They don't want it to squish the fender on the wheel, and then, they got a bum fender. So there's also other people that say really soft in the rear, where I've seen like 8 and 16K, which is not normal typically for cars. And then you got 10, 14, which is pretty typical. That's like BC standard. And then I've seen people run 10 and 16K in the front on these on like a performance build. But again, this is all preference, and yes, it has to do with performance and it has to do with drivability, but that's pretty standard across the industry in springs. So now let's talk about durability. We're not going to talk about rebuildability because this is very simple. You go order these and you can put these into any setup that's got a 70 mil. I would say it's pretty rebuildable. So durability, compared to the stock springs on these, the 7Ks, when I took them out of the rear, they were way more compressed than 8 inches. They were probably like 7.5, 7.25 versus 8 inches when they were new. So durability wise, they did not keep their height, which is going to change how the coilover acts, and not good. So these ones, I've had in the front, I haven't had any issues. I haven't taken them out, but considering the car has not moved in height at all, it's really hasn't had an issue. I haven't adjusted this, I think, since I put them on, maybe once. So it took probably like a month to settle, which is pretty quick. The rears I haven't done yet, so I can't tell you about that. This is 10K, so it is gonna set a little more because it's a softer spring. But as far as compared to the stock ones, these ones perform a lot better, and I haven't had any issues with them settling or anything like that. I would say that they're a lot more durable, and that I've never heard anything bad from Swift Springs. I know a bunch of guys that run them. A lot of the guys that get BC coilovers, they'll replace the springs immediately and get Swift Springs, whatever spring rate they want. Design, it's a spring, man. I don't know what else to tell you. It's pretty straightforward. The only thing that I could say about design is that Silvers and North America and Swift Springs do a good job of telling us what sizes they are, and it has nothing to do with design, but at least you can go on the website and figure out what size you need very quickly and understand how it works. Overall, would I recommend these Maxpeeding rod coilovers to somebody else? Yes, if you're getting springs with them. I also would recommend the regular ones if you're just trying to lower your car and it's a fun car, but for your daily, no, probably not. With the springs, definitely. You could get it for your daily and it would run great. It'd be an affordable coilover, and I believe that they will totally last. I've been driving this car this way for about a year, just to give you context. I've had no issues with the shocks after actually giving it a proper spring rate. Stock with no new springs, it didn't last long. So no, not with stock springs, but if you're gonna go aftermarket springs, definitely would recommend these. Definitely think that Maxpeeding rods did a good job with these coilovers. I think that honestly more people need to try them out. I mean, it's $300, and the other side of that is if you are trying to go to the track and you're trying to do things where you're gonna be beating the car, BC coilovers are very durable. I don't know personally, but obviously considering the industry is using them like the way they are, they're very durable. But things break. And I would much rather replace a $300 set of coilovers versus a $1,500 or $1,000 set of coilovers. And you know, all you got to do is swap the springs over. You buy the springs once, and typically they're going to last pretty long. So yeah, I think Maxpeeding rods is doing the industry a really big favor. It gets a lot of car guys into the industry pretty well and easily and quick. You know, it gives them a little fun and happiness, and it's not an arm and a leg. So yeah, I would recommend these to a friend. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you guys did and you guys like the build behind me, you guys should check out more of the videos. I also have clothes, so if you look, I'm wearing one right now. Miles per gallon. I know this one's beat up because I've been working on the car, but as you can see, this is the setup. If you guys enjoyed, take a peek and like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you guys have any other questions, comment down below. I'll be down there chit-chatting with y'all. Later.